Hey, welcome. How are you? I am Terrell, and welcome to my corner of the internet. Now, in case you don't know me, I'm Terrell Baldock, the Prolapse coach, and I help strong women with pelvic organ prolapse lift heavy, get sweaty, and feel brave in their bodies again. So again, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. We are going to talk about everything you need to know about Kegels. There's a lot of confusion with Kegels. Some women think they need them when they don't. Some women are afraid to do them when they need them. And some women just have no idea what they are. So we're going to dig deep into this. No pun intended, but we're going to help you, or I'm going to help you better understand what's happening with your pelvic floor, with your vaginal muscles, your anal muscles, all of those muscles that your pelvic floor is a home to, right? So, as I mentioned, some women need Kegels to build strength. Some women need to wait a little bit in order to introduce Kegels because maybe they have a really tight pelvic floor that isn't able to open and close or contract and relax for lady parts. Now, first, what I want to mention is that the pelvic floor is actually a part of a larger system known as the deep core system or the core canister. So as you can see, here it is. We've got it right in front of you. So the pelvic floor is just on the bottom here. So there's my cursor. There's the pelvic floor. And then we've got the diaphragm. Maybe I will move this over here. So here we have the diaphragm. So the diaphragm and the pelvic floor actually work together with your breath and any other pelvic floor contraction that you do. So we want to be able to coordinate these two together when we're doing a Kegel. But those aren't the only muscles or the only muscle groups that are involved in this entire process, right? So when you're Kegeling, it's a process and there's multiple muscles working together. So diaphragm and the pelvic floor. So when we talk about ribs stacked over hips, this is why. We want the diaphragm directly up over top. Well, not right on top. There's got to be some space there. But we want the diaphragm on top of the pelvic floor muscle. So when we talk about alignment and neutral alignment, we really mean ribs stacked over hips. And this is how we can get them both working together. Now, when the diaphragm and the pelvic floor are working together, there are other muscles like the transverse ab muscles. So these are the deeper muscles. So if we are looking at the blue here, that's your abdominal wall plus the connective tissue known as the linea alba. So just underneath are the transverse abs kind of down seated below. Right? So when we engage our abs, when we engage our pelvic floor, the transverse abs also turn on. And then we've got the smaller muscles in the lumbar spine known as the multifidus or the multifidi. So again, all of these muscles work closely together to make a pelvic floor contraction happen. And sometimes what happens is that these don't work together, and this is what we work on training. Now, the purpose of a Kegel is really to build strength in the pelvic floor muscles. You may need to do this, after you've given birth most commonly, but some women don't even know that these muscles are there. So they may not have ever used these muscles because they didn't know they existed until I didn't know they existed until I was in my mid-30s. And, they experience some of these symptoms like leaking, or they might have that bulgy pressure type feeling. They might have some lower back stuff happening or some hip stuff. And that can be related to needing to build pelvic floor strength. So this is why we talk a lot about Kegels and we use them with pelvic floor muscle training. All right, so I just explained a Kegel. I am going to, yeah, I guess this is okay. So what is the Kegel? So really a Kegel is a pelvic floor muscle contraction, or the muscle contraction within your vagina and anus, okay? So here's your pelvic floor, as you can see there. There are multiple layers to the pelvic floor. So it's not just the muscles on the outside. So here's like the perineum, right? These muscles actually go deeper. So we've got the more superficial muscles here, and then there's a second layer of muscles, and then there's another layer kind of in there, if you can see it. Okay, so there are multiple layers of the pelvic floor muscles, and sometimes what can happen is that, you know, maybe for some women, the outer layer is really tight and really strong, whereas the muscles underneath, or in the other muscles within the pelvic floor, you know, might need strengthening. So this is where things kind of get confusing. So bear with me, and if you have any questions, just pop them below and I'll pop in and answer them. But yeah, so sometimes there may be some tension on one side of the pelvic floor, maybe the right side, and the left side is okay. Or it could be the other way around, or it could be the outer layer of the pelvic floor muscles that, you know, kind of move okay, and maybe the inner layers are holding some tension and need to relax. So generally speaking, when we want to add in a Kegel, it's because we want all of those muscles to be strong and gain strength. If there's one layer that's on the tense side, then we may need to work with that first before introducing a Kegel. Or all of the muscles within the pelvic floor can be tight, which in that case, again, we need to add in some relaxation and encourage those muscles to relax before introducing the Kegel. All right. So yeah, okay, so some other functions of the pelvic floor, actually I'm gonna go back there. So some other functions of the pelvic floor, the purposes of the pelvic floor, is to provide support to your pelvic organs, but it also helps to maintain continence, right? So this means you can hold your pee and poo in, but again, releasing that stuff when it needs to come out, ideally on the toilet. So some indications of a tight pelvic floor is that you're straining to go to the bathroom. So this is where, you know, this is something that we would look at and take into consideration when designing your exercise program, simply because we want to be on the same page as your pelvic floor. And if you're working with the pelvic floor physiotherapist who is wanting to see some more relaxation in the pelvic floor muscles, we want to be able to support that so that you can get the most out of your work with your pelvic floor physiotherapist and with someone like me. Okay. On the other side of things, you may notice that your pelvic floor needs strengthening because you have some trouble keeping it in, right? So this, again, is where things can get confusing, because you can have a tight pelvic floor and still experience some leakage, right? So this is why this whole pelvic health thing is so individual, because there are a lot of things that go into it. But it also assists in sexual health. So this could be, again, if there is some dissatisfying sex, this could be that you're not reaching orgasm or having a very satisfying orgasm, or sex in general just isn't very satisfying, but it might not hurt. Whereas if your pelvic floor muscles are overly tight and overly strong, you may have some pain or discomfort with intercourse, and this could be upon insertion, it could be with penetration, or it could be with orgasm, right? So any of those things can be an indication of a tight pelvic floor, which again is where we may not want to introduce Kegels at this point in time because we don't want to exacerbate that, okay? All right, so some tips for the perfect Kegel. So we've covered the pelvic floor muscle tightness, we've covered the pelvic floor muscle weakness. We can have both. Both can bring on symptoms of, stress urinary incontinence. So this is where you're peeing your pants and you're not anywhere near a toilet. Pelvic floor muscle tightness, there's generally some pain and discomfort involved, where a lot of weakness, there isn't much feeling at all. Okay, so if you have an overly tight pelvic floor and it's been confirmed by your pelvic PT, at this point in time, continue your work with your pelvic PT so that you are not making things tighter. In fact, you're going in the opposite direction and learning how to relax your pelvic floor so that you can introduce that pelvic floor contraction or Kegel. Okay, where a lot of people get confused, and this might be where you're confused as well, is matching the tension to tasks. So if you've been given the go-ahead to do Kegels, you might find that, I don't know, you're picking up a pencil and you're like this, right? You're using a lot of force, or you're using the muscles in your glutes, in your hamstrings, in your quads, in your abs to all make that Kegel happen. Where really we want to think about closing your vagina or anus with only your vagina and anus, right? We don't want to add in all these other muscles because we really don't need to do that. That's not a Kegel. So when thinking about doing a Kegel, we want to match the tension of the Kegel with the task at hand, simply because you don't need the same amount of Kegel with picking up, I don't know, maybe some stuffed animals off the floor as you would if you're trying to lift a piano, right? So a lot of women, so you might be in the same boat, it's very common, I did this too, so please don't be embarrassed that you're at this place, because we've all started here. But where people tend to get confused is that they need this all the time. So your pelvic floor or your Kegel is both a relax, so open, and a lift, up and in, or a close, right? So when we're thinking of a Kegel, when we're picking up a light object like a stuffed animal, we need maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10, right? We don't need everything in there. But if you were to lift a really heavy barbell from the floor, maybe it's a 200-pound barbell, 70-pound barbell, 50-pound barbell, and that's where your max is, like that's super heavy for you, then yes, you would probably, well, you will need more of a Kegel. So that would be, a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, depending on where you are strength-wise. Okay, so again, you need a different amount of Kegel when you're picking up a light object like a stuffed animal or a pencil, than you do lifting a heavy amount of weight. Okay. Another thing that people get confused with a Kegel or a pelvic floor contraction is that this is a pelvic floor contraction, and this is where they're sitting all the time, right? There is no relaxing. It's just they're maintaining a contraction throughout the day. Again, a lot of people don't know how to use these muscles or that they even exist. So this is just normal. This is why we want to practice relaxing the pelvic floor and adding in that contraction. So you need a little bit of both, but you've got to do it with your breath, okay? So it's funny because I remember watching, oh gosh, well, it was like Keeping Up the Kardashians like a decade ago or something, and they were talking about doing Kegels at a stoplight. No, don't do that. You want to make sure that you're set up to do a Kegel. And again, that's not a Kegel, right? Just opening and closing your vaginal muscles or your anus muscles. It's, deep breath in, filling up your entire upper body. Imagine all of that air going down into your pelvic floor, and then gently lifting your pelvic floor muscles up and in as you're exhaling. So if you want to give this a try, let's give it a go. All right, put my pelvis down. So again, we want to make sure that your ribs are stacked over your hips. You roll forward like you're sitting at a desk. I know this is how I sit at a desk. You're not in a neutral alignment, or your ribs aren't stacked over your hips. So we want to sit up nice and straight, okay? Make sure that your boobs are somewhat pointed forward. And take a deep breath in through your nose, again, filling up your entire upper body from your chest to your back, your armpits, your belly, your pelvic floor. And then on that exhale, gently, we only need about 20 to 30% here, unless you're lifting something heavy. And then you're gently lifting those muscles up and in. So on the inhale, this is your vagina nice and open and relaxed. Exhale, right? And then inhale, and then exhale. So this is the movement ideally of your pelvic floor and your diaphragm as you breathe, right? Diaphragm, pelvic floor. So inhale, nice and open, everything kind of drops down. So your diaphragm and your pelvic floor drop down, your pelvic floor opens, and then lift up, right? Down and up. Okay, so again, making sure that you're using a diaphragmatic breath with that Kegel. So the diaphragmatic breath, is just that breath that I showed you. Deep inhale in, and then exhale, and then the gentle lift of your pelvic floor. So if you're not sure of how to do this or how to imagine this, one great cue, well, there's several great cues. You've probably heard, pick up your blueberry and imagine your vagina is a blossoming flower as you inhale. As you exhale, pick up that blueberry or that bean or that marble or whatever it is. I really like an elevator cue. And I first heard this from the Pelvic Guru, which you'll see the Pelvic Guru graphics through this training. And she describes it as an elevator, right? So you're on the ground floor, and then floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, right? So you should only hear, in the context of this, is nice and slow, right? So imagine ground level 1, 2, 3, not right? Again, it's going to look different if you're lifting something really heavy. All right, so yes, we talked about if Kegeling is right for you. So again, if your muscles are overly tense and they have a hard time relaxing at this time, it may not be recommended by your pelvic PT to add in a pelvic floor contraction or a Kegel until your pelvic floor is able to fully relax and then contract. But if your pelvic floor is, able to relax and you need to build strength within it, then yeah, a Kegel is likely right for you. So the best way to know, if possible, is to get assessed internally by a pelvic floor physiotherapist, or you can even do this yourself. So you can insert 2 of your fingers into your vagina, or if you're uncomfortable with that, you can just place your 2 fingers at your perineum, and you can inhale, and on the inhale you should feel that perineum drop down. Okay, if you are internally assessing yourself, you should feel the same sort of thing. You should feel those muscles dropping down and feeling a little bit more relaxed. On the exhale, you should feel those muscles moving up and in, even without a Kegel. Now, some women, they don't have a lot of strength when they Kegel, and that's where we want to build that and actively do that Kegel. And in time, when we practice that, it does become more natural and automatic, so that you don't even have to think about it, right? So we're training the mind and the body as well. So this isn't just a body thing, it's a mind thing. And this can, if you're just starting out, it might take a few weeks before your body kind of picks this up. So be patient, stay consistent, and when you do the work regularly, you will notice a difference in your symptoms. Now, how this all relates to exercise, and this is what I specialize in, is that I understand the movement and how the pelvic floor is supposed to work. So if you tell me that your pelvic floor is overly tight, then I know right now is probably not the best time to be lifting super heavy or doing anything that is overly impactful, that we kind of need to build that strong foundation first and then move into higher impact activities. If your pelvic floor is on the weak side, what we need to do then is just build that coordination. Again, we're building that strong foundation. It's just a different starting point. So we're building that strong foundation and working on that coordination with exercises. So we might start on the mat and then move your way up to body weight exercises, lightly loaded exercises, heavily loaded exercises, and that's where the fun stuff really is. So thank you again so much for dropping by and learning more about Kegels with me. It is such a fun topic to talk about and so misunderstood by a lot of people. So I really hope that this clears a lot of things up for you in terms of the Kegel. So again, thank you so much and take care. Have a wonderful day.